Good morning.
It's almost 6 p.m., guys, at least here in Poland. So we are almost ready to really open Orichalcum. Some people are still joining. We were asked by the FASA Earthdown channel community to record this panel. I hope that everyone is okay with that. If you are not, you can always type in chat. You can see the Deeper Secrets chat. So hopefully the recording will have a good quality, and for the people busy enough not to come here or not able to understand English, we'll have it translated. Yeah, Morgan changed into Panda.
I think that means we're about ready to start.
Yeah, we are ready to start. 6 just hit. Welcome everybody at Orichalcum, the fourth edition, like an Earthdown edition. Oh, Josh, welcome. So the fourth edition of our Polish Earthdown convention, now due to coronavirus pandemic, is going online and became the first international Earthdown convention. Yay!
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 Okay, so in the name of the Toporis, the Polish Associations of Fantasy Players, Game Masters, and Fans, I would like to welcome you all and introduce you to Panda, Morgan Weeks, one of the developers of the or behind the Earthdown 4th edition, especially the mechanics side, if I remember correctly.
That is correct.
Yes, it is supposed to be Q&A, but maybe there is something you would like to share with us to start a conversation, because I have at least one question, which is a question that always brings us to the heat of the discussion. I'm speaking about forging weapons, but let's leave it for now. When you will be silent, I'm going to ask for it.
Okay.
System, yeah.
Welcome, everyone. I'm glad to be here. It's noon where I'm at, so it's not onerously early, which is good for me. I'm not really a morning person. So yeah, the title of the session is Mystic Paths and Deeper Secrets, a reference to my book that I was the owner of in every way, The Adept's Journey Mystic Paths, that introduced a lot of new toys and brought back some old favorites and some new items to the setting. And Deeper Secrets is, of course, a reference to the forthcoming book on magic that I know everyone is waiting for with great anticipation. And I was working on that actually just before this started. So it is underway, though it is a big book of mechanics and revised and new. So it takes quite a while and a lot of effort to get it in place. So yeah, with that, I don't have much to say other than the preamble. So let me know your questions, and I will do what I can to answer them without giving too much away, as Josh and Andy are here, and I know Andy will beat me. That's not a metaphor.
Maybe if I will ask the questions, she won't beat you. But we already seen mystic paths, which are like one of the biggest. I don't know how to say it right. One of the biggest improvements in the game systems. Probably the questors are the second ones since the first edition. Everybody were asking. Why, for example, cavalryman is not a path, or will it be a path? Why can't an archer be a cavalryman?
Strictly speaking, an archer can be a cavalryman.
Yeah, but
why? So a path doesn't hold anything that is required to be a whole character unto itself. Is a pretty important distinction between a path and a discipline. If a character concept requires them to have some basic level of proficiency in something, it's not going to be a path, so to speak. It can be kind of a funny distinction to make. So a path wouldn't give you the ability to cast spells if you didn't already have it going in, because of the investment that's required in doing that. So cavalryman isn't actually a great fit because of the number of talents required to perform that task. You're going to need your writing talents, you've got charge, your animal bonding. All of these things build up to what a cavalryman is. So conceptually, it's interesting to think about stacking that kind of a path on top of a character, but the way the system currently functions, the number of basic abilities you need to do that is too great to put on a path, because you're looking at, you're going to have to be rank 5 before you can do the thing you're supposed to be able to do, given the limitations on how many talents you can get with the structure of a path the way it is. Does that make sense?
I think yes, pretty much yes, especially the part about being fifth circle to do the thing you are supposed to do. But you mentioned something interesting about casting spells. And since you are working on the deeper secrets, this is the time to ask a question. Will there be any paths for the spellcasters?
So if kind of my stretch goal for myself in Deeper Secrets is a path. It is not a spell casting path. Spellcasters may get a little more from it than everyone else, but it is explicitly designed to be available to everyone. The amount of kind of building the technology on what exactly a dedicated spellcasting path looks like and what it would do doesn't exist, and that would add significant time to getting the text out there. And I don't think that effort is going to be worth it, as opposed to the good of getting the contents of the book otherwise out to everyone, which does have a considerable amount of new material. I mean, there's all the 5 spellcasting disciplines get new spells from Circle 1 all the way up. There's, old spells returning, new spells that were developed for them. There's new types of enchanting that fill in some holes in the world and introduce some new concepts as well. Similar but not the same. Similarly to how life enchanting was introduced in Iopos, something the Denerostus and the Therans do more than anyone else. But yeah, so to circle back, no, there will not be spellcasting specific paths, but it is something there's a good chance I will visit in the future. I don't know exactly what they will look like or what they will do, because the difficulty is making them useful but not a requirement, so that it isn't something that every spellcaster goes, oh, how do I build my character so I can automatically get into that? Which shouldn't be the case, because at that point it's not a character option, it's a character requirement.
And this is the way the Earthdown is doing better than, for example, Dungeons and Dragons, especially third edition, which you were required by some players to make a specific build with multi-classing and all that stuff. And in Earthdown, you can play one discipline for the whole campaign and you won't get bored.
Yeah. In the path design, it's very important for me to balance, say, for example, a sword master versus a sword master who's also a tail master with equivalent legend points. What can each of them do? And establish some parity between that so that a tail master, not tail master, tail dancer, my apologies. So that becoming a tail dancer is appealing for people who want to do that, but remaining just a sword master should also be appealing for someone who really wants to get those upper tier abilities. So that maintaining that balance can be tricky, and I have no illusions that it's perfect across the board. It isn't, because that's impossible, but the goal is to get it good enough so that it doesn't break a table. And hopefully everyone, if there are problems due to these, everyone at the table is an adult and can talk about it and figure out a solution that works for them so that everyone's happy.
Okay, and what about those optional changes that you mentioned? Any optional rules? Could you share what you are working on?
As of right now, there aren't any optional rules intended for Deeper Secrets. Kind of the explorations on changing fundamentals of the game I'm kind of doing on my blog, more than in the rules itself, given that we're at the point where it's deeper changes to the system and seeing how those play out with some larger changes as a whole, which don't work as well for optional rules, which tend to be here's a modification you can make and the implications of that and how it affects the given table are easier to understand rather than deeply going in and altering some fundamentals and then seeing how that goes, which is more of an experiment. And so, as of right now, there are no optional rules planned for Deeper Secrets, but they may show up depending on what happens between now and then. It just isn't currently a plan. I'm assuming that was the question.
Yes. Okay. No, don't worry. Okay, so since I'm talking since the beginning, does anyone have a question? Has a question? Because I can do this all day, like Captain America.
What kind of vague timeline is the magic book? So not even a month, and I'd be willing to go for a year instead of a quarter.
My sincere hope is to have it released for Gen Con next year. That isn't a promise. That's a timeline I would really like to meet, and I think I can. I just hope I have a couple collaborators who are working with me, and unfortunately, one of them dropped off the map again, so that is slowing things down. I don't like releasing material that hasn't had some other people to go over it first, because just because it makes sense to me doesn't mean it makes sense to anyone. But so Gen Con next year is when the Kickstarter gets announced, that's when you'll know where it's at officially.
Awesome. I for one won't hold your feet to the fire. I'm a big fan of CGL, and they're known for deadline. What's that? So, thank you.
Yeah. I would rather have it be done right than done now. I know that is, as a fan, that can be difficult, but it is important to me to not put out material that has to have extensive errata and corrections and editing post hoc, rather than at least making a very good effort to get it right the first time.
That's important to all of us.
Yeah.
It's done when it's done, and it's the best way.
Yeah, I know that isn't always a popular answer, but because who doesn't like new toys?
But it's the right answer, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I for one like that answer.
So, but it
Yes.
is a big book of toys.
Especially with the questers and the mystic paths, some of us didn't have a chance to even play with any of the new disciplines or new paths. So having another book with a lot of rules this year would kind of overload you with new things to incorporate into your sessions. Any other questions?
Yeah, well, firstly, I'd just like to say thanks to Morgan and the rest of the developers for such a fantastic job they've done with the new edition. I think people that I've played with and spoken to about it have all agreed that it's been the most improved edition to date. So big thank you for that.
Thank you very much. That means a lot.
Secondly, I just want to say that in particular, I love the theme and everything you go for with the Mystic Paths book. I read through it all, and being a big fan of the spellcasting disciplines from day one, love the theme and everything you've got behind the shaman there. Very much my style of play and the way I like it. I have to say, I kind of see it as almost like the spellcaster version of the Beastmaster, which then leads me on to the Beastmaster as it, it almost feels more like a combat character now rather than a sort of utility sort of mix and mash of sort of the Skelp and the wilderness survival type, which is the way I always used to see it before. I'm just curious how the two would mesh together as a second discipline here, or
So how would Shaman and Beastmaster play together?
pretty much, yeah.
Okay. So it's kind of funny you mention that because the original version of the Shaman that I posted on my blog to get feedback on, it was on Christmas Day, I think like 2015 or something. It was years ago. Was actually a spellcaster that used melee combat as one of their 3 options on character builds. They had unarmed combat, claw shape, and access to a significant number of combat talents like maneuver and anticipate blow. Those kinds of things. They still had durability 3, so ultimately in the final product it got removed, and all of these spells that supported that were also removed. The invoke spells had a partner with them. I think it was called an imbue version of the same spell that imbued an attack. It, as written, it didn't end up working as I hoped, which is why it went out as an experiment first. I gathered the data, some people were playing it and talking about it, and it wasn't very popular as just a conceptual option for people playing it. And from the people who did try it, that very low durability meant that they didn't have any staying power to actually be engaged in a fight. So going forward to now, how do they play together? And the answer is they can actually play reasonably well together as long as you build for it. It would work best conceptually starting as a Beastmaster, then picking up Shaman, and using your Shaman abilities to buff you and the rest of your group. You can use your talent options from Shaman to pick up your animal companions and get your support abilities. The wilderness style abilities that they both get access to. But since you have limited talent options, you would focus more on the melee combat through the Beastmaster, and the Shaman would have the more supporting role. However, you switch those if you use the using all talents to advance option, as opposed to the required discipline progression. You can go either way, and you can simply use your Beastmaster talent options to fill out those supporting talents to pick up your animal companions. rather than doing that through the shaman, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's kind of how I envisioned it working. Taking the Beastmaster as a sort of heavy combat orientated character to start with, and then sort of almost sidestepping into the shaman as a sort of a self buff, if anything, to make it a little more self reliant, and as to take on a little more supportive role within the group.
No, absolutely. Now, the mechanical approach, the in setting what the character would be like, it's actually, I mean, it's clearly complementary, but it would be a Beastmaster getting more into the spiritual parts of what does it mean to be a Beastmaster? How does that relate to the natural world? There's beast spirits. How do those relate to animals? The summoning, being able to summon a beast spirit is, even if it takes 30 minutes, is extremely powerful with everything they can bring to the table. And that kind of a character would like the path I hope to introduce in Deeper Secrets a lot, and would fit them very, very well in that search in general.
You wait that one then.
Yeah. So, as to briefly touch on how the Beastmaster came to be, how it was, Josh spoke to it in the Earthbound Sky Survival Guide briefly. And it's essentially when we were redeveloping the disciplines, looking at Beastmaster, it did a whole bunch of different things, but it didn't do any of them particularly well. And creating a discipline and putting in the core book that explicitly focused on having animal companions was something of a curse to game masters. Cavalrymen have their own baggage, and then making Beastmasters say you have to have these animal companions. Not every group wanted to do that. Not every player wanted to have an animal companion in that way. And animal companions are difficult. So when looking at what they do, we decided to focus on the savage warrior archetype as something that was appealing to people when we talked to them about it and gathered information and got feedback. That was something that really resonated with the majority of people and made the Beastmaster more popular as introducing to campaigns in general.
Must admit, I did quite like the fact you've taken a character that was, like you say, notorious for having half a dozen, animal companions running around after you. And I can imagine. I mean, when I was playing in first edition, I was a player rather than a GM those days. So I never really took on that kind of extra strain and stress as a GM. But I can imagine now looking back, it would be a problem. Whereas these days, I like the fact that it's more of a bestial nature to a character, taking on, the sort of the animal traits rather than, having, half a dozen extra, characters that comes to, to include in your combat situation or anything else. It for me feels like positive move. And I know some Beastmaster players that I've known for years have said that it wasn't really the way they'd imagined the Beastmaster. But I think they're probably a little bit stuck in previous editions and not seeing how the progression has, over the previous edition, sorry, has now taken it into a different route. It's still keeping the theme, which I like. So. Yeah, thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. More than happy.
I got a question. We're done there?
Yes, sorry.
I actually just wanted to know, since we get the chance to hear you talk about it, what actually goes on behind the scenes? Like, how do you develop stuff? Because this is something like I'd be interesting to just know. I know you go through iterations like with the shaman and with the master of the hunt over the years. But what's the actual approach to doing that kind of stuff?
Oh, you have to ask the hard question, Sebastian. Okay, so it's a lot less interesting than it may seem. It starts with me and a little notebook and my fountain pen, and I come up with an idea and record it. and it is there's a lot of these notebooks just full of ideas, and a lot of them don't go anywhere, or they turn into something else. And then I'll build on it there in my spare time, kind of recording my thoughts on it. And then once I get somewhere, I simply start writing about it, and then I'll revise and record, try and build on that and see where it goes. And at some point, if I think it's a good idea, I'll either show it publicly, or maybe have someone look at it first to make as a sanity check for if it has a lot of mechanics behind it, to make sure they're clear and you can understand where it's going. This isn't always successful. So in the case of disciplines via multiple revisions, I'll come up with the concept, and then I get my concept out, then I cull down the full list of talents to ones that could work, and then I start cutting them down further, since I know the total number of novice talents, total number of journeyman talents, total number of ward and master that it gets, and I can reduce those lists and move things around.
So it's more like a top-down approach. You first get a big theme and narrow it down then.
Yes.
Okay.
So for a real-world example, the Gauntlet started off with, first it started off with deciding that Purifier wasn't going to be a discipline, and then it was broken into multiple parts, and from there, one of them was a heavy unarmed combatant. And I wanted to explore the realm of what happens if you want to wear heavy armor, you don't care about initiative, and going last is a virtue rather than a penalty. What does that look like? And there was a lot of technology that needed to be created to support that decision and balancing it, and so that it was a viable choice, but played fundamentally different than anything else, and their outlook on everything had to support that. And so it started with an outlook, then the mechanics, and making sure the feedback loop between the system and the setting was throughout the entire process. Because if the system can't support the setting and the setting doesn't reinforce the system, then in Earth Dawn, that's a problem. Those two always need to connect to each other. So their philosophy and how they play need to be shared. So it plays like how it feels.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a difficult question to answer. I don't know if that really gets to it. If there's something specific in there, or there was something more, please let me know.
No, that was just the general idea, because a lot of people start when they homebrew stuff, they start with like a general idea or like a theme. And I just wanted to know like what you do. Do you start do you have something specific in mind and then try to build around it? Or basically if you start with an overall theme and then you want to narrow it down to actually crystallize something out that would work?
Yeah, it can go either way. There's not everything starts with one idea, and it can be starting with the idea of here's my end goal, and here's where I want to go to, or it can start with the idea of a theme I want to build on because I think it's interesting. They're two different ways, and I use them both. I don't think one's more right than the other. Obviously, if you have an end goal in mind, then it's easier to know what success looks like because you're measuring by reaching that. Whereas starting with the other direction, you don't necessarily know where you're going to end up. You've just known where you started and how it's grown from there. And so knowing if you've accomplished what you set out to do is more difficult. But that's often the genesis of what a path looks like in the developing, is starting with the idea of here's a concept I want to build and see where it goes and where it leads to, if that distinction makes sense.
Yeah, I think so.
Excellent.
That's it from me.
I hope you don't want me coming in again. Just coming on the back of that last question. If a player has an idea of a new path or even discipline, would you have any guidelines or even just sort of guidance towards doing that, where to start, and sort of even like from the mechanics perspective, how many talents and discipline, how many talents and options and things like that, or is it just common sense based on what's already printed?
Well, the good news is the number of talents available to paths and disciplines is a fixed number. So that should simplify life. If you look at any example, so for a path, you have to decide, is it a journeyman or a master tier path? Does it get 5 or 10? The ironically titled named Journeyman Path, thanks first edition, breaks that rule in that it has 5 ranks, but they cost master tier. I mean, looking at it, there's a clear reason for that, but so that will tell you how many talents it gets, and they're all consistent across the board on the number of talents. And the same with disciplines is true. So for disciplines, it's n plus 2, where n is the number of circles in a tier. So is the number of talent options they get. So journeyman, warden, and novice all have 10 talent options, and master has 8. Because master only has 3 circles. And forgetting the mechanics, disciplines, they all pretty much function the same. There's a few, Gauntlet and Swordmaster have more curious defense advancements, representing a +4/+4/+2 scheme, whereas everyone else gets +5/+3/+2. And then for the other set of benefits, your recovery tests, Mystic Armor Initiative, it's +3/+2/+1. But there's no reason you couldn't play with that and do like 2 across the board if it fits. And the templates will tell you, what bonuses come at each level. That's always a constant as well. There aren't any published guidelines on how to do these things, because I'm more a believer in showing rather than telling as a whole. If I give you a whole bunch of examples, then that forces you to look at them and kind of start to understand how they fit together and how they work, rather than publishing a guideline on, so here's how you build your own discipline, and here's how you build your own path, because that can lead to a circumstance where you've gained the knowledge without gaining the wisdom behind it. And like the discipline in first edition, the companion had a guideline on here's how you build your own discipline, which was neat, but it led to a lot of people building disciplines that were kind of a greatest hits, and here's the most powerful talents that you can get, in the most powerful orders you can get, which wasn't actually a useful set of tools. It was interesting, and it said, oh, yeah, I can do that, but it wasn't the most useful way to convey that information, because I felt like really looking at them and how they were balanced out was a more useful tool to homebrew your own stuff. To switch to paths briefly, paths as a whole are, in a lot of ways, more difficult to make than a new discipline because of how much unique stuff they bring to the table. It's potentially a collection of some new talents, depending on themes of the path itself. For example, Messenger doesn't actually have any new talents because everything they needed to do already existed in the talent selection. And there was nothing that they should be able to do that, in the term, looking at talents, that they should be able to do that other disciplines shouldn't be able to do. And that's an important distinction on should this talent exist, is if you look at another discipline and say reasonably, another discipline should be able to do this as well, it's not really a good candidate to make a talent, but it may be a good candidate to make a knack, and then give everyone access to it who should. And one of the big things paths have is a collection of knacks, some of which are exclusive, some of which they just have earlier access to. And they introduce a lot of new ways to spend karma. So I think I gave you way too much information there for your question. I'm sorry.
No, it's absolutely fine. Thank you.
And I don't know if I actually answered it.
No. That's fine. It's not for anything in specific I have in mind anyway. It's just a couple of ideas are sort of flying around my head at the minute, and I just wanted some rough guidelines. So
Yeah.
thank you.
If you're working on stuff for your table, I mean, the best thing you can do is be honest with everyone and say, hey, look, if we introduce this and it's broken, we're going to need to sit back and we're going to change it so that it works for us and that it's interesting but doesn't alter the shape of how the game plays.
Right. Yeah. Thank you.
Out of this is kind of based off of the you mentioned the wisdom needed. I'm kind of curious how the prevalence of like power gamers who just would want to create the best ever, how that informs your game design choices as you're writing new things.
That is a difficult question. I try not let it bother me. When looking at how something can be used, I'll look for how could this be abused. There's a temptation to write all the negative ways something that could be employed and all of the here's the weird sideways you could look at this to break it, but and some of my reviewers want to include all that information, which tends to bloat the text box, and it makes something very difficult to read and very, very boring. It's not like rules are very exciting to begin with. So it's trying to God, this is not easy to explain. So it's kind of acknowledging they exist, and I can't do anything to stop it. Nor do I have any real desire to say, no, you can't do this, unless it is something that truly breaks the game in a fundamental way or is using an ability inappropriately. Those kinds of concerns are more for each group to resolve. And it really should be, because it's their game and they can play it how they want. No one's going to show up at their door clearly to tell them they're doing it wrong. You're playing to have fun. If you're having fun, that's all that counts. If there's legitimate questions on how something's used, that's fine. Excuse me. If someone looks at something and sees that the wording is maybe a little unclear, but the intent is obvious, then don't be deliberately obtuse about an ability just because it can get you some advantage. That's not helpful to anyone, and it makes everything actively worse for all the people at the table, and having that sort of bad faith interpretation. And so I try and design things for people to use in good faith rather than trying to maximize their benefit from it. I don't know. I hope that answers your question. It's something that's difficult to articulate, and it benefits a lot from having additional people reading and looking at your material so they can offer a different perspective on here's the things you've missed, here's the things you haven't seen and haven't considered. And that's one of the reasons why I have my small development team always check my material before it goes out, because I'm 100% not perfect and I miss plenty of things.
Thank you. Yeah, I just was curious on your thoughts, so you definitely addressed my question. Thank you.
Another questions? Really?
Okay, if nobody else wants to. I got one that is has been tricky, has been discussed a lot, but throwing weapons, man. Where are we going with those?
Oh man, that is. I feel like some days that's my cross I'm bearing is throwing weapons. It's not easy. I know people are aware that I've posted on my blog 2 different potential solutions for them. One in the form of a discipline, one in the form of a path. I think so. The difficulties in pursuing either of them is throwing weapons are a challenge to begin with because you're throwing your weapon quite literally away. In the way Earthon's set up, you're very tied into 1, maybe 2 weapons, given the threading mechanic and the forging mechanic. You've invested a lot into those, and it can be expensive and or impossible to really branch out from that. So there's a returning knack that exists for throwing weapons and alleviates that to a great degree, but it costs 1 strain each time, and that starts to become very expensive for a strategy that is worse than missile weapons. So you're paying a lot for a stylistic thing. It's worse than missile weapons in terms of they do less damage on the whole for a weapon, for a top-end weapon, and the range is significantly less. So what kind of advantages do throwing weapons have? And that is mixing melee and ranged combat, which is a cool concept, but also difficult to execute because you've got 2 attacking talents all of a sudden, and not all of the abilities that support them are complementary to each other. Nax can help solve that, and in one of the paths that I put out unofficially explores that a lot, and the discipline also, to a much lesser extent, explores mixing melee and ranged combat with throwing weapons. One of the things both of them do is fundamentally they clone your weapon that you use, and you throw the clones instead, which solves a lot of the problems of you're throwing your weapon unless you don't have it, and the strain cost exists, but it's really lower than returning, which helps. So it's. I wish I had a really great answer for it. My only escape clause here is no edition's done throwing weapons well, or at all. I mean, first edition Thieves got throwing weapons as a discipline talent, but it was like what, 7th circle. So you were already locked into melee weapons because you got that at first circle, and the throwing weapon shows up as a discipline talent later on, and that was a weird situation to me to begin with. Technically, archers can do throwing weapons, but that is a curious choice given the general superiority of a missile weapon in comparison. I mean, obviously, the disadvantage of a missile weapon is that you can't use as big of shields with them. You can use the buckler or the fern dask, both of which have a special exception to be allowed to be used with missile weapons. Whereas the throwing weapon is one-handed. So, I feel like I'm rambling on this one.
I must say, like, I've always been a huge fan of blade juggle. As like the weird one out. Because it kind of works, and it's also kind of a nightmare to keep track of. But for me, always like blade juggle was the talent you take once you've gone down the path of throwing weapons.
I agree with you on that 100%. It is good. It is weird. It supports throwing weapons, but it also is a lot to keep track of because you have to track the total size of weapons and what weapons you're juggling. It helps if you're juggling all the same weapon, but that's not necessarily going to be the case. It's also a challenge to implement and write it so it isn't horribly confusing because there's a lot going on. So throwing weapons is something that I will often have enter my thoughts before I go to sleep, and how to implement good fixes to them. And I don't know what the answer is. If a new discipline is going to be introduced, it has to. The question is where. What does it do? How does it fit into the setting? and what kind of archetype is it? I mean, there's the one that I've posted. I don't know if it fulfills all of those. The same things with a path. A path is clearly easier to introduce to the setting, but it also delays a character's ability to become proficient in their chosen form of combat until much later. You're looking at, since fifth circle is pretty late to, get the basic toys for the thing you wanted to do, and you're really forced into this one option to do it, and that's not what I want paths to be. That feels like a band-aid, but no matter what the solution is, we are honestly looking at what band-aid to apply. So
yeah, I think it could help to just embrace second throwing weapons as like a secondary choice instead of trying to make it a main way of attacking.
yeah, and that is easier to fix. There's some knacks I've written about that will show up in Deeper Secrets, which, despite being advertised as a book for things for magicians, it actually has a lot of knacks for everyone in it. And throwing related knacks are one of them, such as using your offhand weapon with second weapons to throw it instead of, stab.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, thanks for that.
I have a rules clarification, not necessarily on Mystic Paths, unfortunately. I am querying Shield Bash as a talent. Now, I was the way Shield talent, the Shield Bash talent reads is that it's a simple action, but then if we read through the text, it suggests you need to use your melee weapons to attack with it. So what I'm wondering is Shield Bash supposed to be in place of your melee weapons attack, or is it just a free action that you can use? But use your melee weapons to determine the outcome.
Yeah, something kind of screwy happened with that file, and it never got. No, is the honest answer. That was our first book ever, and so you use melee weapons to make the attack, and Shield Bash is a damage replacement talent, essentially. So it should be a free action.
Okay, so I could effectively Shield Bash and melee attack in the same turn.
You would use your melee standard action to use Shield Bash.
Right. Okay. So when you say it's a replacement, it's the equivalent of Claw Shape for Beastmasters.
Correct.
Right. And just to follow up to that, there's a knack. I'm just trying to run through my companion now to find it. The Shield Charges or Shield Rush. I'm trying to find it now. I've seen it because I'm playing a warrior at the minute, and I'm hoping to build towards it.
Yeah.
Trying to find it.
Shield Drive.
Yeah.
Shield Drive. That's the one. Sorry.
So that one is a simple action, and it doesn't cause any damage. It just inflicts knockdown.
Right. Okay. So no damage, inflicts knockdown, but you lose the protection from the shield in that turn. It also says it can be used as a I had a point I was about to say. Apologise. It can be used as a. Sorry, I'm still trying to find it. My apologies. Last minute thing. I'll come back to it if there's a problem, but no. That answers the question, the main question anyway. So thank you for that.
Okay, so you can look further to find what you wanted to ask about. And we are getting close to an end, so the last chance to have questions before we start our sessions. And speaking of which, if no one submitted or registered any game session or on any game session, you can always do this.
Right. Sorry. It can be used as a skill. Sorry.
Yes.
So does that mean effectively you don't need to have shield bash as a skill, but you could take shield drive as a separate skill?
Correct. You cannot use them in the same round. In the next set description on how they function, you can't use the talent and the skill of a derived knack in the same round because otherwise that gets very, very messy.
Right. Yeah. No, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, the silence longer than 3 seconds is someone that no presenter wants to hear or not hear. So I think we can thank Panda or Morgan for your time, and we are all happy that it was. I think it was the first international live online lecture that we get on Earthdown because podcast doesn't count, Josh.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It was a delight to be here. I'm on Discord intermittently if you have any questions. And if you have any questions now, please let me know. I don't want to deprive you of your time. We've got 10 more minutes. Anything at all, just let me know.
Okay, thank you very much. I will stop the recording and try to download it to see if it's recorded correctly. If you are registered on any game session, try to go to the channel that was mentioned in the session descriptions. I will post the link one more time. Thank you again, Morgan. Will you join us tomorrow on the FASA's panel, or you are
Yeah.
one of the developers? So yeah, probably we'll poke you for some secrets when Andy is not around. I don't have my truth potion for Andy, so I won't get anything from her like I did last year. But
The truth about Andy is she's the weak link in the revealing of secrets.
I know that.
Just so everyone knows, Andy is the weak link. The rest of us live in fear of her. But,
Maybe she's horror and she feeds on your fear of revealing information while doing herself.
horror, mad passion, half dozen, 6.
Okay, thank you so much. And now Craig will stop recording.
Well, now
Okay.
that Craig's gone, we can talk about all the secrets.
Yeah, I know. I wanted to do the same. Okay, we've got 8 minutes. What else can you tell us about Deeper Secrets?
So the specific thing Andy wants me to talk about that she has been sworn never to bring up, and so this is the one thing I will leak. The path I was alluding to is familiars. They will be coming back, I hope, in a different form, and they'll be open to everyone. There are some ways in which spellcasters, specifically summoning spellcasters, will benefit more from them, but they will. The plan is to have them return, and everyone can access them. One of the big changes that I have currently planned is they will be all familiars will be spirits, not animals, because animal companions really already handle animals very well, and that makes the distinction between them much easier to handle because any animal becoming a familiar with the mechanical changes planned for them is extremely difficult to balance in any way, nor are they quite as customizable as making a spirit familiar is. So that is the big thing there. If you have any questions about that, you have 6 minutes.
Will you follow the old rules of familiars gaining separate legend points?
No. Familiars will run off of yours, but you will have access to a suite of things to improve them.
Okay, cool.
For the new people to Earth Dawn, what are familiars like in Earth Dawn?
In previous editions, they were mostly a place to stick an extra spell matrix.
Magical companions.
Yes, Cosmet is correct in how they were a spirit or animal that was bound to you, clearly inspired by the D&D tradition, and you gained some benefits from them. There was a number of talents that doing the ritual would give you, and you would take some blood magic damage as part of it, and if your familiar died, bad things would happen to you. But for most players, the interest was either having a cute companion plus a free additional spell matrix, because you could hold spell matrix inside of your familiar.
How bad are the things happening to us when the Edition 4 familiars die?
That has yet to be determined. I mean, it's clearly going to be a little bad. The worst part is that your familiar's dead, which is rough.
Yeah, that should be the worst part of it.
I'm trying to think what other the improvements of the familiar. Is it? Do you have any insights on that yet, or is that just a plan?
The general structure is familiars are spirits with the same strength rating, so that is part of it, is improving their strength rating, as well as giving them powers to access, because they're spirits. So a lot of it is building the spirit and how they show up. And there are some of the named spirits that appear in the Game Master's Guide and in the Mystic Paths for Beast Spirits may have started their lives as familiars whose master died, and they were thus then freed and became their own spirit, and that kind of affected who they are and what happened afterwards, which you can see in, if you do some of the read them with that light, some of those write-ups make a little more sense.
Cool.
Can you give us an example of a way you have tested, knowing that it may not end up in the final product, a familiar helping a non-spellcaster?
I do not want to give away examples because they may reveal things that won't end up or may not end up. Essentially, the biggest way is it would give non-spellcasters access to some new abilities that would typically only otherwise be available by summoning a spirit. And you'd have a spirit who is, generally speaking, significantly more willing to help you out without asking for something in return, because what they're getting out of that relationship is a name, they're getting power, they're becoming, that link to you is their benefit. And ultimately, that's where it starts, but ultimately it turns into, hopefully, a deep connection between each of the parties, where when one passes, and it will hopefully be the name giver, because they have a lifespan spirits don't quite understand, there is genuine loss and sadness from that, but such as the connection between two such disparate entities. So from an name giver, in a very pragmatic sense, you get access to some cool abilities that you've had to improve, but you wouldn't otherwise necessarily get. And in some cases, you could potentially advance your spirit to look like an animal companion type thing, though with the associated danger of, if your familiar dies, that is a big loss.
What mechanic would that be following then? As in, will it be like a ritual? Would it be a talent knack, or
Well,
if
it starts as a ritual that you perform, and then you have your path talents that you use to advance it, and you have knacks to further refine what it's like. And some of
Right.
those choices will build into bigger branches. It's complicated in how the web of abilities connect to each other, which is why it's my stretch goal rather than a promise to get in there, because there's a lot of factors that work together and balancing issues, because this introduces a lot of factors into play that some groups may not want to deal with, which is one of the reasons it works well as a path, because then the GM can simply say, look, we're not going to introduce this path into the game because I don't want to deal with it.
So is it going to be similarly gated by role-playing aspects rather than fixed mechanics?
I haven't worked that part out yet as such, since there isn't an organization, and there won't be an organization determining how quickly you advance. It may be a little more quester-like in how advancement is handled, but that is one of the larger issues I've thought about a little, but haven't really addressed. And we are at 1. Well, my time it's 1. And Poland
Yeah.
at 7.
Okay, so since we were supposed to start gaming now, I kindly ask everybody to go to the tent where you are supposed to be. And if you are wondering why the game rooms are named like this, it's because I tried to reproduce what we have on site at the convention, and we are playing in the tents. So now you know.
6.
will the games be available to spectate?
It depends on the players and GMs. Probably the FASA's ones are gonna be, but ask Josh and Andy. From our side as coordinators, it's not a problem. It's up to the players and game masters.
Okay, cool.
Well, thank you, everyone, again. I hope you all have a great weekend. Take care.
You too. Thanks, Morgan. Cheers.
Thank you, and see you tomorrow.